So, what happens when a catastrophe strikes? I mean, really strikes. It doesn't just knock down buildings, it can literally erase evidence, critical data, and years of work. How do the organizations we rely on, from major companies to police forces, actually survive the unthinkable? Well, today, we're diving into the official playbook for when disaster hits. This quote from H.G. Wells is over 100 years old, but wow, has it ever been more true? It feels like our ability to learn and plan is in this constant, frantic race against catastrophe. And sometimes those lessons, they're learned the absolute hardest way possible. And to really get a grip on this race, we've got to look at a moment when the unthinkable actually happened. A moment when critical evidence, stuff that could make or break major cases, just disappeared in an instant. September 11th, 2001. As the world was watching the horror unfold at the World Trade Center, the NYPD's high-tech crimes unit was facing a nightmare within a nightmare. Their offices were right there, near the towers. For them, the disaster was only just getting started. The collapse of the towers was a total wipeout for the unit. In a flash, they lost almost everything. We're talking active case files, irreplaceable criminal evidence, and so tragically the lives of valued officers. Entire investigations, poof, gone, just wiped clean. So what do? How do you recover from that? Their solution was, for the time, pretty radical. They gave laptops to every single agent and made it a rule. All active case files go home with you, every single night on securely encrypted systems. This basically created a scattered, resilient backup of their most important work, making sure that one single disaster could never, ever wipe them out like that again. What the NYPD did there? That's a powerful, real-world example of a formal strategy that organizations now rely on to survive the unimaginable. It's all part of having a backup plan. And that brings us to the big question, right? How do modern organizations, whether it's a police department trying to protect evidence or a global company trying to protect its data, how do they prepare for an event that could shut them down for good? Well, to prepare, they use two key strategies that sound really similar but are actually very different: disaster recovery and business continuity. The best way to think about it is with this analogy. Disaster recovery, or DR, is like fixing your main house after a fire. The whole goal is to repair it and move back in. But business continuity, BC, that's about moving into a temporary apartment so you can keep your life running while the house is being fixed. So let's be super clear. Business continuity isn't about fixing the original spot. It's all about making sure the most critical parts of your organization can keep running from a totally different location. It's about long-term survival. And believe me, this is not some abstract idea. This involves incredibly detailed, boots-on-the-ground planning. The source material talks about a fictional company, HAL, that's out scouting a renovated textile mill. Basically, an empty building they could turn into a full-blown office at a moment's notice. Now that's business continuity in action. Okay, so you have a plan. Great, but a plan is just paper without people to make it happen. So who exactly is on the team that gets that panicked call when the worst happens? Now here's a huge misconception. A lot of people think this is just an IT problem. Oh, the servers are down, call tech support. But no way. A real successful response needs a whole team with different skills from every single part of the organization. Your core response team usually has 4 key parts. First, you've got management. They're the command and control. Then you have operations. These are the folks who actually do the main work of the business. Of course, you need IT to get all the tech humming again. And then, and this is so crucial, you have logistics. They're the ones who get supplies, materials, and even people to that new site. For a police unit, logistics might mean setting up a totally new, secure evidence locker from scratch. And man, this expert quote from Kathleen Lucy just hits the nail on the head. She says, companies are usually pretty good at the IT side of things, but they're abysmal, her word, at planning for logistics and communication. Think about it. You can have perfect backups of all your data, but if you can't get your people and your stuff to the right place, that data is completely useless. So, you know you need a plan, and you know who needs to be on the team, but how? How do you actually build it? Let's open up the playbook. Fortunately, you don't have to invent this stuff from scratch. The experts rely on proven methods, like this 7-step playbook, which is adopted from NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. All right, let's walk through it. Step 1, get the bosses on board. Without that, you're going nowhere.
Step 2, figure out your weak points. You have to know what's most critical. For that NYPD unit, this would be identifying those absolutely irreplaceable case files. Steps 3 and 4 are all about prepping, building up your defenses, and figuring out how you'd actually relocate. It's only then, in step 5, that you actually write the detailed plan. But listen, it doesn't stop there. The last 2 steps, this is where so many plans fail. You have to test it and train your people, constantly. And finally, step 7, you have to treat it like a living thing, always keeping it up to date. A plan from 3 years ago is just a recipe for disaster.
And that whole idea of keeping plans current, well, it was put to the biggest test imaginable just a few years ago, with what became the largest business continuity event in modern history. Yup. In 2020, the entire world got thrown into a real-time, unplanned business continuity test. The COVID-19 pandemic was a curveball that very, very few organizations had ever really planned for. So what made this so different? Almost every BC plan was built for things like fires or floods or attacks, disasters where your main building is gone. But with the pandemic, the buildings were perfectly fine. The problem was the entire workforce was suddenly stuck at home. You couldn't get to the office. And the scale of this was just staggering. A full 75% of businesses in the US were significantly impacted. It was a global wake-up call that your plan can't just be about losing a building. It has to be about losing physical access to your people. So organizations had to learn and adapt on the fly. You saw the vast majority completely rethinking how they operated, changing everything from office layouts to daily schedules, all just to keep the lights on in this bizarre new reality. You know, when you boil it all down, the biggest lesson is this. A business continuity plan cannot be some dusty binder sitting on a shelf. It has to be a living, breathing document that is constantly changing to face whatever new threats are out there. Because the one thing we know for sure is that the next disaster won't look anything like the last one. The lessons from 9/11 helped write the playbooks that followed. The lessons from the pandemic are writing the ones we use now. Which really just leaves us with one final, sobering question. What unexpected catastrophe is out there, right now, waiting to write the playbook of tomorrow?